Welcome to Ignatius Press Off the Shelf with Joseph Pierce, coming to us from South Carolina. Vivian Dudro here with me, Father Fessio, in our studio at Ignatius Press. We're continuing our discussion of the Confessions by St. Augustine of Hippo. And we had intended with this new format of ours, of the Off the Shelf, to cover a book about every 4 weeks. With a larger book like this, maybe 6 weeks. And I was trying to press for that. But in preparing for this session, I just realized this is one of the 100 greatest books of Western civilization. It's not only a good book in itself, but it's had an impact, repercussions all through the centuries in Catholic theology especially, but in Protestant theology as well. Luther was an Augustinian. The Calvinists, of course, made a principle out of Augustine's Massa Damnata, the condemned mass. So I think we should not dilly dally and not get off on tangents like I tend to do, but let's take the time as needed to cover the truly important elements, themes, passages of this man who is really one of the fathers of Western civilization. We are now in book 8 on his conversion, and Vivian and Joseph decided against my wishes that they want me to kind of take the lead here. But I definitely want to make sure that you interrupt and interject.
Well, you never have to worry about that with me.
And even interfere if you want. But the first point I want to make is that a lot of factors entered into his conversion.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the important ones was friendship. And in this book, he covers some of these friends. On page 195, he mentions, top of the page, you inspired to me the idea that I ought to go to Simplicianus. A couple lines down, I'd heard how from his youth he had lived for you in complete dedication. So a dedicated, serious Christian is someone that Augustine, as he's trying to find his way, says, I need help. I want to find someone who's done this before. So I guess my questions. Page 197. Well, at the bottom of that first paragraph, he mentions those Platonist writings conveyed in every possible way, albeit indirectly, the truth of God and his word. So it's important to remember that Augustine didn't have Aristotle to read. He did have Plato. And Plato had a tremendous following with the Neoplatonists. They were very active in Rome. Plotinus was probably the most well-known of them. But Augustine, like what he saw in Plato, that Plato had this idea of a higher world, of these ideas of a God who is good and so on. But at the bottom of that page, he says, middle of that paragraph, he told me a story about Victorinus. So here's not just a friend, but now a story of a holy man. And page 198 at the bottom, the story as Simplicianus told it to me was this. Victorinus was in the habit of reading Holy Scripture and intensely studying all Christian writings. So Augustine's yet led now into reading Scripture and Lectio Divina, reading of sacred writings. Down a few lines, Victorinus would chaff him, the friend that he was talking to, Simplicianus. It's the walls that make Christians then. That is to say, can't we just believe? Do I have to have a church, I want to move on, jump ahead to 208 here. I'll go back, but in 208, that new paragraph in chapter 6, now I will relate how you set me free from a craving for sexual gratification which fettered me like a right-drawn chain and from my enslavement to worldly affairs. So he admits his sexual escapades had damaged him,
Mm-hmm.
But on page 209, number 14 there, 2 lines down, a man named Pontitianus came to our house to visit Alypius and me. So now we get two more friends in here. Alypius, his friend Pontitianus. Bottom of the page, he began to tell us about the monk Anthony of Egypt. So here again, another story of a holy man. And finally, on page 210 there, 4 lines down, we were stupefied as we listened to the tale of the wonders he would work within the true faith of the Catholic Church. New paragraph, his discourse led on from this topic to the proliferation of monasteries. And then down below there, he mentions again Pontitianus, and about 5 lines up there, they found a book which contained the life of St. Anthony. That's a book about a saint, written by a saint, because St. Athanasius read it. So that was basically the point I wanted to make, that in Augustine's confessions about his conversion, it's not just his intellectual trajectory, it's also the friends he made in seeking the truth.
Yes, and given his struggles with his sexual appetite, which he forthrightly admits to, this one of the things that held him back was the fear that he would not be able to live a virtuous Christian life if he became a Christian. So the example of these other men in his life was important for that as well, to be able to see other men making sacrifices for the Lord and inspiring him the confidence that with God's help, he could be like them. So it's not only the power of good friends, it's the power of good example set by good friends. And that's right, Father. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Page 202. This is not a major point, but in that paragraph at the bottom, 4 lines into it, he says, there is no pleasure in eating and drinking unless the discomfort of hunger and thirst have preceded them. Drunkards eat somewhat salty food to induce a searing, parched sensation, which will be deliciously quenched by drink. This is the origin of potato chips.
Yeah. It's the origin of the cocktail hour. Yeah. But
But I want that actually, Father, as well, because there is no pleasure in eating and drinking unless the discomfort of hunger and thirst have preceded them. I mean, there's actually in that one sentence, there's something very mystical and profound, that basically enjoyment, as opposed to, should we say, self-indulgence, requires sacrifice. That we have to actually experience a hunger or a thirst for something to actually enjoy it. And if we don't experience that hunger or thirst, we don't enjoy it. And if I can just connect that with the top of page 211, 3 lines down, because all these discussions you've just gone through summarize the friends and how they're leading him to holy books and holy men such as St. Anthony of Egypt. And then one of his friends turns to the other and says, 3 lines down, tell me, where do we hope all our efforts are going to get us? What are we looking for? In whose cause are we striving? Does life at court promise us anything better than promotion to being friends of the emperor? And once we are, will that not be a precarious position fraught with perils? Will it not mean negotiating many a hazard, only to end in greater danger still? And how long will it take us to get there? Whereas I can become a friend of God here and now if I want to. This whole idea, in seeking self gratification, seeking comfort, power, prestige, that in itself, first of all, does not bring satisfaction or joy, but on the contrary, brings anxiety, precariousness, and because this is just only a short way ahead of Boethius, who finds himself in exactly that position. So, what is it we're looking for? Is it worldly gratification, worldly satisfaction, or do we need to forsake those things and embrace, if you like, suffering because we are hungering and thirsting for something deeper?
Yes, and I raise this question to myself. Is it true that you can't enjoy something unless you've had a desire for it first? You can't enjoy eating unless you're hungry. And whenever I ask a question like that, I want to say, what's it like in heaven? I mean, in heaven, we're going to be fully satiated, right? So will we have enjoyment without hunger, without thirst? And I see the answer is no, for this reason. that we are going to be face to face with God, and God is ever greater. And no matter how much we enjoy that beatific vision, there'll always be more that we don't have. So the paradox, and Augustine talks about this later too, is that we will hunger and thirst for spiritual joy, but it'll be while we're sated, we'll be hungry. So it's that paradox in heaven of both the desire and the fulfillment simultaneously. It's also like this idea of freedom. We're free here to sin. We're not free to sin in heaven. Does that mean we're not free? No, heaven is the convergence of true freedom and certainty and the right choice and inability to sin. Because that's a true freedom, is God is free, but he's not tempted to sin. All right. Well, let's see. On page 213, about 6 lines down, I had been extremely miserable in adolescence, miserable from its very onset. Again, young boys and girls can identify with Augustine here. And as I prayed for you for the gift of chastity, I'd even pleaded, and this is a famous expression of Augustine, grant me chastity and self-control, but please not yet.
Yes.
So that's, I mean, again, there's so much of us in Augustine and Augustine in us. And I want to encourage our readers and listeners to read along in this book. If you've read it before, read it again. If you haven't, by all means, read it, because we're giving you some of the highlights. But reading this it's entering into prayer. It's entering into the mind of a great man who is revealing himself, and with the same kind of questions that ordinary people have, except that he doesn't just brush them off and forget them. He pursues them. Page, I guess, of 16 and 17. Oh, and here's this question of the resistance of the will to itself, the resistance of the mind to itself. In the middle of the page there, he says, how then did this bizarre situation arise? How it developed? The mind commands the body and is instantly obeyed. So, the mind commands itself and it meets with resistance. So that's the issue here. When the mind orders the hand to move, so smooth is the compliance that the command can scarcely be distinguished from execution. Move my hand, right? Yet the mind is mind, while the body is body. When the mind issues its command, and the mind itself should will something, and the mind is so commanded, in no other than itself, it fails to do so. How did this bizarre situation arise? How it developed? So that's an interesting question. I can say, lift my finger goes up. I can say, don't take that glass of wine, and I take it. Bottom of the page, the command does not proceed from an undivided mind. Now you realize our mind is divided. Inasmuch as it issues the command, it does will it. But inasmuch as the command is not carried out, it does not will it. This is the famous St. Paul in, is it chapter 5 or 6 of Romans? That which I will to do, I don't do, and that which I will not to do, I do.
I put St. Paul right here in my margin. Yep.
And you've got this underline too, the new paragraph there. This partial willing and partial non-willing is thus not so bizarre, but a sickness of the mind which cannot rise with its whole self on the wings of truth, because it is heavily burdened by habit. There are two wills then, and neither is the whole. What one has, the other lacks. And of course, since Augustine's asking this question, we want to say, well, how'd you solve this, Augustine? How did you get the right will to overcome the wrong will?
Lots of grace.
In some sense, the whole of these confessions, of course, are his showing us painstakingly how he achieves that, right? from the wrong will having the upper hand at the beginning of the confessions to the right will having the upper hand at the end of the confessions.
Joseph, I got a little quiz for you here on page 220, the last 3 lines. In my secret heart you stood by me, Lord, redoubling the lashes of fear and shame in the severity of your mercy.
Mhm.
That Latin is severa misericordia, a severe mercy.
Mhm.
What does that remind you of, Joseph?
Mhm.
I'm probably going to pronounce his name incorrectly, but Sheldon Vanukin or Vanoikin, right?
Sheldon Van Auken, yes. He's got a wonderful book called A Severe Mercy, in how his wife, he and his wife were both free spirit agnostics on a boat traveling, around the world. And they came to England and they met C.S. Lewis, took some classes, and his wife became a convert. But she didn't want to force it on him, but she prayed and prayed. And she eventually was willing to give her life for him. And God gave her cancer, took her life. And that led him to become a Christian. And that was the severe mercy. God answered his wife's prayer to sacrifice herself for him, and then he came into the Christian faith. So I don't know if Sheldon got that title from Augustine.
I was wondering the same thing. I wrote it in my margin that
Yeah,
where
it's
that
interesting.
came from.
My guess is either he got it directly from St. Augustine or he got it from C.S. Lewis, who got it from Augustine. One or the other
Yes.
would be my guess.
Yeah, that would be.
Yes. Yes.
Page 222 goes into his struggle with chastity again. 2 lines down. Aggressive habits still taunted me. Quote, do you imagine we'll be able to live without these things?
I just stop right there.
Sure.
So, when we're asking, when he says his mind is divided, he wants something, but then again, he doesn't want it. He's praying for chastity, but not now. This question, do you imagine you'll be able to live without these things, which is, of course, from the enemy? What is that but fear of not being able to live without this other thing? That's what holds us in bondage. The fear that I simply will not be able to live without, and now fill in the blank.
Yeah, and that actually, again, what we've been on the topic of C.S. Lewis reminds me very much of The Great Divorce, of course, with the man who's suffering from the same sin here, incontinence, lust, with this sort of little demon on his shoulder whispering into his ear that you don't want to be without me. Surely you need me. But the interesting thing here, the whole the rest of that page, that long chapter, there, number 27. He actually what is it that helps? Is that seeing continence, the dignified figure of continence, almost being projected to us here as a personified abstraction, like Lady of Philosophy and Boethius. But this is actually seeing real Christians living a life of chastity and being fruitful in that.
Mhm,
Why? Because I saw that this name, continence, was by no means sterile, but the
mhm.
fruitful mother of children conceived in joy from you, her bridegroom. So this wonderful image here of the fruitfulness of chastity.
And its fruitfulness is in spiritual children. This is why we call Mother Teresa mother, why we call Father Fessio father, because in giving up natural fatherhood and motherhood, they now are free to become fathers and mothers to so many more children than they could have ever born, biologically. And so that, I think, does hold people back sometimes from a religious vocation, is the fear that now they won't have offspring and their parents won't have grandchildren. It's a hard thing to that's such an inbuilt drive to procreate. And so to see this understanding of spiritual motherhood and spiritual fatherhood, so beautiful.
And, when there are large families, which is a gift of God, because many want to have large families but can't, then that fear is not as great because the name won't die out. I mean, there's only 2 Fessios left in the world. One of them, my brother died, so his wife, my sister-in-law, still got the name, but we're it. And when she dies and I die, it's it. So I'm gonna make the most of it.
I thought she has a child.
He died. Oh no, you're right, Gopal. Yeah, my nephew. That's right, Gopal. So go
It's actually
forward.
interesting on that, Father. Aidan Mackey, you might remember Aidan Mackey, the great
Yes.
Chestertonian, who died at the age of 101 about 2 years ago. He had 9 daughters, and so his name's not continuing either.
Okay. But he might have a brother or something. Joseph, are there any passages from that page 222 you want to read?
Well, I've read the middle one. I highlighted the whole chapter, but I think the key thing here is that in the midst of this struggling with lust in his life and lustful habits, he comes across Christians living chastely, and he sees this as they're far happier than he is. Right? He's clearly his habits that bring him transient pleasure do not bring him the sort of joy that these people who are practicing chastity have. They have something much more valuable than joyful and satisfying than he has, seeking, should we say, passing satisfaction. They have something which is much deeper. So I might just use that one thing, but it's a continence here. This same continence was by no means sterile, but the fruitful mother of children conceived in joy from you, her bridegroom. So Christ as the bridegroom of the bride who is continence in this personified sense.
The reason why it doesn't bring him joy is because it's a form of slavery. It was St. John Paul II who said, if you can't say no, you're really not free to say yes.
Yeah.
And so the reason why Augustine is in this torment is because he realizes he's not really free so long as he's letting this other thing control his life.
Yeah, and what I find it brings it home to a lot of people, young people maybe particularly, is when you start using the word addiction. That if you're addicted to something, you might
Right.
want it more than anything else, but are you free, or are you a slave to that particular thing? And that brings it home. And of course,
Right.
sin is addictive. If we don't seek grace, we will be enslaved by it, as St. Paul and others say.
And in a certain sense, we're all addicted in some way
Mm-hmm.
because addiction is a habit. It's just a bad habit. But you might be addicted to playing golf or watching the news, or checking your phone frequently. So the key is to try and avoid habitually doing those things, which are temptation or distraction, and form good habits. Be addicted in a good sense. Learn to love singing hymns. If you're addicted to that, well, that's a good
The
thing.
one thing that far few people are addicted to these days, in my judgment, is silence. Even I go to the gym, everybody's wired for sound. Everybody has to be permanently surrounded by noise and distraction. And how can anybody find peace with Christ or anything else for that matter if you're going to be wired for noise and distraction every moment of your waking life?
And we are contributing to it right now by providing more sound for people to listen to. But spend as much time in silence as you do on podcasts. I would say, this is a chapter where he actually converts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's take that a bit. 220 at the bottom. Uh, all this argument in my heart raged only between myself and myself. Alypius, my friend, stood fast at my side, silently awaiting the outcome of my unprecedented agitation. Next page, 3 lines down. A huge storm blew up within me and brought on a heavy rain of tears.
Mm-hmm.
In order to pour them out unchecked with the sobs that accompanied them, I arose and left Alypius, for solitude seemed to me more suitable for this business of weeping. Just what you said, Joseph. We need silence then, too. Down a few lines, I flung myself down somehow under a fig tree.
Mm-hmm.
Many things I had to say to you, and the gist of them, though not the precise words, was, O Lord, how long? Famous in Latin, quam Deo Domine, O Lord, how long? And then, new paragraph at the bottom here, suddenly I heard a voice from a house nearby, perhaps the voice of some boy or girl, I do not know, singing over and over again, Tolle lege, pick it up and read, pick it up and read. New page 2024, 3 lines down. I stemmed the flood of tears and rose to my feet, believing that this could be nothing other than a divine command to open the book, capital B, and read the first passage I chanced upon. A wonderful, Christian practice,
Mm-hmm.
Towards the bottom there, I snatched it up, opened it, and read in silence the passage in which my eyes first lighted. And here's a quote. not in dissipation and drunkenness, nor debauchery and lewdness, nor in arguing and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make no provision for the flesh or the gratification of your desires. I mean, talk about a bullseye from 1,000 yards.
Yes.
Yeah, I take a walk. This is on point. It might sound like a meandering. I take a walk down to the creek on our property every morning, or at least I plan to get feel for the day. But I'm also hoping to see something, a snake or fish or something. And I always say, if you want to see, you have to look. And the same thing here, if you actually want to hear, you have to listen. And so he hears this anonymous voice of a child, pick up and read, and he's listening. And so, as he's listening, he hears and acts upon that, and that's why he opens the book, does what the sign says. And again, if we are distracted with too much noise, that we're not listening, right? And God might be speaking to us, and we are not listening.
So we're about the end of the episode here. A wonderful book, and I'm glad we didn't rush through it. There's just too much in here. And the last little thing I'll read on the last page, 225, is what did Augustine do with Alypius? We went indoors and told my mother, who was overjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts with his friends, but before his friends, with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
So without Monica and his friends, we probably wouldn't have Augustine.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us. Hope to see you next episode. God bless you all.